Single mother agrees to bathe a millionaire. What she finds changes everything. The moment Sofia Martinez stepped into the grand estate of the infamous billionaire Diego Alcazar, she knew she didn't belong there. The walls were lined with priceless paintings from renowned Spanish artists. The chandeliers glittered like constellations against the high ceilings, and the sheer size of the mansion made her feel as though she had wandered into a palace. Her worn-out sneakers barely made a sound against the polished marble floors as she followed the housekeeper, Senora Ramirez, through the long corridor. "You'll be expected to start immediately," the older woman said, glancing back at Sofia with sharp, assessing eyes. "Senor Alcazar is not an easy man to deal with. Many caregivers before you have quit within a week." Sofia swallowed, gripping the strap of her old handbag tightly. "I don't quit easily." Senora Ramirez arched a brow. "I hope that's true, for your sake." For Sofia, failure wasn't an option. As a single mother struggling to raise her 5-year-old daughter, Lucia, she couldn't afford to walk away from this opportunity. The pay was more than she had ever earned in her life. It was the kind of money that could finally give Lucia the stability she deserved. Even if it meant bathing a man she had never met, even if that man was Diego Alcazar, the billionaire who had disappeared from the public eye after a tragic accident left him unable to care for himself. Sofia had heard the rumors that he was cold, ruthless, impossible to deal with, that the accident had turned him into a recluse, refusing to see anyone but the staff who worked in his home. And now she was about to become part of that world. Senora Ramirez stopped in front of a large wooden door and turned to Sofia. "This is his room," she said. "He doesn't like small talk. Do what you're here to do and don't take anything personally." Sofia nodded, wiping her sweaty palms against her jeans. "Got it." With a final look, Senora Ramirez pushed the door open. Sofia stepped inside and felt her breath hitch. The room was dimly lit, massive in size, with floor-to-ceiling windows covered by thick velvet drapes. A fireplace crackled in the corner, casting flickering shadows against the dark wooden walls. And in the center of the room, seated in a large wheelchair, was Diego Alcazar, her new employer, and the man whose body she would soon be bathing. He was nothing like she had expected. Sofia had imagined an older man, frail and thin from months of isolation. Instead, Diego Alcazar was devastatingly handsome. His sharp jawline was covered in light stubble, his dark hair slightly tousled. He had the kind of chiseled features that belonged on magazine covers, not hidden away in a dimly lit mansion. But his most striking feature was his eyes, icy blue, piercing, and filled with a coldness that sent a chill down Sofia's spine. He was watching her carefully, his expression unreadable. "You're the new one," he finally said, his voice deep and smooth. "Yes," Sofia managed to say. "Sofia Martinez." He didn't acknowledge her introduction. Instead, he turned his wheelchair slightly, as if dismissing her presence altogether. "Let's get this over with." She blinked. "Excuse me?" "You're here to bathe me, aren't you?" he said, his voice laced with something unreadable. "Then do it." Sofia hesitated. "Would you like me to assist you to the bathroom, or can you—" "I can get there myself," he interrupted, rolling his wheelchair toward the ensuite bathroom without sparing her another glance. Sofia took a deep breath before following him. She could do this. She had to do this. The bathroom was more luxurious than any she had ever seen. A massive glass shower, a deep soaking tub, and heated floors that felt warm beneath her feet. But Sofia barely had time to process her surroundings before Diego stopped in the middle of the room. "Help me undress." She froze, her heart pounding violently against her ribs. She had known this was part of the job, had prepared herself for it. But standing here, facing a man like Diego Alcazar, it suddenly felt 1,000 times more intimate than she had expected. He must have noticed her hesitation because he let out a humorless chuckle. "What's wrong? I assumed you knew what this job required." Sophia straightened her shoulders, refusing to be intimidated. "Of course," she said, stepping forward. "Let's get started." Her fingers trembled slightly as she reached for the hem of his t-shirt. As she lifted it, her breath caught in her throat. She had expected scars, weakness, the broken body of a man who had given up on life. What she found instead was muscle-hard, defined, strong. His chest was sculpted, his abdomen firm. The ridges of his muscles were clear beneath her fingertips. There were scars, faint lines that told a story of pain and recovery, but they did nothing to diminish the sheer power of his physique. Sophia swallowed hard, forcing herself to remain professional. But then she made the mistake of looking up and found Diego staring at her. His jaw was clenched, his expression unreadable. The tension in the room was suffocating. "Do you like what you see, Señorita Martinez?" His voice was low, almost mocking. Sophia's cheeks burned. She quickly averted her gaze. "This isn't about what I like or don't like. I'm here to do my job." "Good," he murmured. "Then do it." She moved efficiently after that, determined to remain unaffected. But with every brush of her fingers against his skin, every unspoken glance exchanged, she felt something shifting between them, something dangerous, something neither of them was ready to admit. And as she turned on the warm water and reached for the washcloth, one thought echoed in her mind. Asterisk. This job was going to be a lot more complicated than she had anticipated. The warm water cascaded over Diego Alcazar's skin, steam curling in the air between them. Sophia worked in silence, her hands steady as she ran a soft cloth over his broad shoulders, careful not to linger too long. She could feel the tension rolling off him in waves, though whether it was from discomfort or something else, she couldn't tell. "You're too quiet," Diego said suddenly, his voice cutting through the thick silence. Sophia hesitated. "I didn't think you were the type who liked small talk." "I'm not," he admitted. "But I don't like being treated like a fragile doll either." She paused, wringing out the washcloth before meeting his gaze. "I don't see you as fragile, Señor Alcazar." His expression was unreadable, those icy blue eyes scanning her as if searching for a lie. "No?" "No," she said firmly. "You're still strong. I can see it in your body, in the way you move, in the way you try to act like you don't need help." A smirk ghosted across his lips, but there was no humor in it. "And yet here we are, you bathing me like an invalid." "You're not an invalid," she countered without hesitation. "You're a man who's been through hell and is still fighting." Something flickered in his gaze, something raw, something vulnerable. But just as quickly as it appeared, it was gone. "Turn the water off," he ordered. Sophia complied, stepping back as he reached for the towel beside him. But before he could grab it, she was already there, wrapping it around his waist with smooth efficiency. His body tensed. She pretended not to notice. "I'll help you back to your chair," she said. Diego hesitated for a fraction of a second before nodding. "Fine." She braced herself, placing one hand on his arm and the other at his back. He was heavier than she expected, the muscles beneath his skin solid and unyielding despite his injuries, despite everything. He was strong, and the way his body reacted to her touch, tense, controlled, made something stir deep within her. As she guided him back into his wheelchair, their faces were inches apart. His breath was warm against her cheek, his grip tight on her wrist. "You're not afraid of me," he murmured. It wasn't a question. Sophia met his gaze without flinching. Should I be? A beat of silence. Then he let out a low chuckle, shaking his head. You're either the bravest woman I've ever met, or the stupidest. She smiled slightly, stepping back. Maybe a little of both. For the first time, something shifted between them. Not just as employer and caretaker, but something more, and neither of them knew how to stop it. That night, Sophia lay awake in the small guest room she had been given, staring at the ceiling. The events of the evening replayed in her mind, the feel of Diego's skin beneath her hands, the way he had looked at her. She had taken this job out of desperation, out of a need to provide for her daughter. But now she was wading into dangerous waters. Men like Diego Alcázar didn't belong in her world, and she didn't belong in his. So why did it feel like fate was pulling them together anyway? The next morning, Sophia found herself in the kitchen making coffee before starting her shift. Senora Ramirez entered moments later, eyeing her with an expression that was unreadable. You lasted longer than I expected, the older woman commented. Sophia smirked. I'm stubborn. Senora Ramirez hummed, pouring herself a cup of tea. Be careful, dear. Senor Alcázar doesn't let people in easily. And when he does, she paused, her gaze sharp. It never ends well. Sophia swallowed but said nothing. She wasn't here to get involved. She was here to do her job. At least, that's what she kept telling herself. Later that afternoon, she entered Diego's room, expecting the usual routine. Instead, she found him at the window, his hands gripping the arms of his wheelchair tightly, his jaw clenched. Everything okay? She asked cautiously. Do I look okay? His tone was sharp, biting. Sophia exhaled softly. What happened? He didn't answer at first. Then he ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in every movement. My lawyer was here, he muttered. More paperwork, more discussions about my condition, and whether I'm fit to continue managing my business. Asterisk his business. The empire he had built from the ground up, the one he had been forced to step away from after the accident. Sophia watched him carefully. And what do you think? His eyes snapped to hers. What do you mean? Do you think you're fit to go back? She asked simply. His jaw tightened. No one would take me seriously in this state. That's not what I asked. He hesitated. For the first time, he seemed truly uncertain. Sophia stepped forward. You can do it, Diego, but only if you stop seeing yourself as the man you used to be and start accepting the man you are now. He exhaled harshly, looking away. And who is that, Sophia? She softened, kneeling in front of him so he had no choice but to meet her gaze. Someone who's still fighting, she said quietly. Someone who hasn't given up, even if he thinks he has. Diego stared at her, something unreadable passing through his expression. Then, without warning, he reached out. His fingers brushed against her cheek, lingering just a second too long. Sophia's breath caught. She should have pulled away. Should Asterisk have, but she didn't. And neither did he. They were standing on the edge of something dangerous, something neither of them had been prepared for. And it was only a matter of time before one of them fell. Sophia should have stepped away. She knew that. But as Diego's fingers traced lightly against her cheek, as his piercing blue eyes searched hers, she found herself frozen in place. Her breath was shallow, her heart hammering against her ribs. It would be so easy to close the distance, to give in. But before she could do something reckless, something she would regret, Diego blinked, almost as if realizing what he was doing. His jaw clenched, and his hand dropped from her skin as if burned. Go, he said abruptly, turning his wheelchair towards the fireplace. His voice was gruff, edged with something she couldn't quite place. Hurt, frustration, or was it the same longing she felt? Sophia hesitated. "Diego," I said, "go." The air between them had shifted, thick and unspoken. Whatever had happened in that moment, he wasn't ready for it, and maybe neither was she. Without another word, she turned and walked out of the room, pressing a shaking hand to her chest as she shut the door behind her. For the next few days, things between them were different. Diego was distant, colder than before. He no longer met her gaze when she helped him dress, no longer made sarcastic remarks during his therapy sessions. He answered in short, clipped sentences, keeping their interactions strictly professional. And it hurt. Sophia hadn't realized how much she had grown accustomed to his attention, to his presence, until it was gone. Senora Ramirez noticed. "Whatever happened between you two," the housekeeper muttered one evening, "fix it before it gets worse." Sophia frowned. "I don't know what you're talking about." Senora Ramirez gave her a knowing look. "He's shutting down again. And the last time that happened, it took months to get him to even try to fight for himself." A pang of guilt settled in Sophia's chest. This wasn't just about her. Diego had spent the past year trapped in his own mind, convinced he was useless, broken. But she had seen him fight. She had seen the fire in his eyes when he pushed through the pain, the determination in his jaw when he worked through therapy. She couldn't let him slip back into that darkness, even if it meant confronting whatever was brewing between them. That night, she knocked on his door. Silence. She knocked again. "Diego, it's me." Still nothing. With a sigh, she pushed the door open. He was by the window again, staring at the rain pelting against the glass. His hands gripped the arms of his wheelchair tightly, his entire body tense. "You're ignoring me," Sophia said, closing the door behind her. "Oh, I'm not ignoring you," he muttered. "I'm giving you space." She frowned. "Space from what?" Diego exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "From me. From whatever the hell happened between us the other day." Sophia's throat tightened. It was nothing. His lips twisted into a humorless smile. "Right. Nothing." She crossed her arms. "Why are you acting like this? Why are you pushing me away?" Diego finally turned to face her, and for the first time in days, she saw the storm raging behind his gaze. "Because I can't want you, Sophia," he said, his voice raw. "I can't be the man you deserve." Her breath caught. "You don't get to decide that." "Don't I?" His jaw clenched. "Look at me. I can't even stand on my own. I can't give you a normal life. Can't give you the kind of future you need. And you—" His voice faltered. "You have a daughter, Sophia. You need stability, not some broken man who can barely take care of himself." Sophia's chest ached. She wanted to shake him, to make him see what she saw. "You think I care about any of that?" she said, stepping closer. "You think I don't see the way you fight every single day? You are not broken, Diego. And you're not pushing me away because you think you're not good enough for me. You're pushing me away because you're scared." His throat worked as he swallowed. "Damn right I'm scared." Silence stretched between them, heavy and thick. Then finally he spoke again. "I want you, Sophia," he admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "More than I should. More than I ever thought I could want anyone again." Her heart slammed against her ribs. "But I won't trap you in this life," he continued, his eyes burning into hers. "So if you have any sense left, you'll walk away now, before this becomes something neither of us can undo." Sophia felt the weight of his words settle deep in her chest. He was giving her an out, a chance to leave before she got too close. Before he could say another word, before she could convince herself to walk away, Sophia reached for his hand, threading her fingers through his. "I'm not going anywhere, Diego." His breath hitched, and in that moment, something inside him shattered. He tugged her forward, his other hand gripping her waist, pulling her down into his lap. Their lips met in a slow, aching kiss, one filled with every unsaid word, every denied feeling, every moment of tension that had been building between them for weeks. It was raw, it was desperate, it was everything, and it changed everything. Sophia hadn't meant for this to happen. She had come to this house for a job, a paycheck, a way to give her daughter, Lucia, the stability she deserved. But now she was in Diego Alcázar's lap, his hands gripping her waist, his lips pressed against hers in a kiss that left her breathless. Everything about this was wrong, and yet she couldn't pull away. His touch sent fire through her veins, his lips demanding yet hesitant, as if he was afraid she would vanish the moment he let go. But Sophia wasn't going anywhere, not this time. Her fingers tangled in his hair, pulling him closer, deepening the kiss. She felt the sharp inhale he took, the way his body tensed beneath her. For so long, he had convinced himself that he wasn't a man anymore, that his injuries had stripped him of his power, his identity. But right now, he was just Diego, a man who wanted her. And God help her, but she wanted him too. Then suddenly, Diego tore his mouth from hers, his breath ragged. "Sophia." His hands tightened on her waist as if he was struggling with himself. She knew that if she didn't stop this, if she didn't force herself to be rational, they would cross a line neither of them could undo. And she wasn't ready for that. So she placed her forehead against his, closing her eyes. "We should stop." He let out a shuddering breath, his fingers brushing against her skin. "I know." Neither of them moved for a moment. They just sat there, breathing each other in. Then Sophia slowly pulled away, climbing off his lap and putting much-needed distance between them. She wrapped her arms around herself, avoiding his gaze. "I should go." Diego's jaw clenched, but he nodded. "Yeah." She turned to leave, but before she could reach the door, his voice stopped her. "This doesn't change anything," he said, his voice hoarse. Sophia swallowed hard before glancing back at him. "Doesn't it?" She didn't wait for an answer because, deep down, she already knew. The next few days were tense. Sophia tried to keep her distance, tried to pretend that nothing had happened between them. She focused on her tasks, kept their conversations brief, avoided lingering in the same room for too long. But Diego was watching her. Every time she entered a room, she could feel his gaze on her, burning, intense. He didn't say anything, didn't acknowledge what had happened. But he didn't have to. It was in the way his fingers tightened around the arms of his wheelchair whenever she was near, in the way his jaw clenched whenever someone else spoke to her, in the way his eyes darkened whenever she avoided looking at him. It was dangerous. And yet, neither of them seemed capable of stopping it. One evening, after she had finished cleaning up, Sophia went to check on Diego one last time before heading to bed. She found him in his room, staring at himself in the mirror. His shirt was off, revealing the scars that ran down his back and sides, evidence of the accident that had taken everything from him. His muscles were still there, his body still strong, but there was a weariness in his expression that made Sophia's heart ache. He caught her reflection in the mirror and turned slightly. "Couldn't sleep?" She hesitated before stepping inside. "I wanted to make sure you were okay." A ghost of a smile flickered across his lips. "You always do that." She didn't respond. Diego studied her for a long moment before speaking again. "You're afraid." Sophia stiffened. Of what? He turned his wheelchair to fully face her. Of this. Of us. She swallowed. There is no us. His gaze didn't waver. Liar. She exhaled sharply, running a hand through her hair. Diego, you know this is impossible. Why? He challenged. Because I'm in a wheelchair? Because I'm not the man I used to be? No, she said fiercely, stepping forward. Because you are still that man. You're stubborn. You're strong. She stopped herself before she could say too much. But Diego caught it. His jaw tightened, his hands gripping the wheels of his chair. Then what's stopping you? Sophia closed her eyes. Lucia, her son. Her entire world. This wasn't just about her. It was about him. About the life she was trying to build for him. She couldn't afford to get caught up in something that had no future. No certainty. I have a son, she said finally. And he comes first. Something flickered in Diego's gaze. I know, he said softly. And I'd never ask you to change that. She bit her lip, emotions threatening to overwhelm her. Then don't ask me to stay. Silence. Then finally Diego exhaled, running a hand through his hair. If that's what you want. It wasn't. But it was what she needed. So she turned and walked away again. The night passed in restless sleep. Her mind was filled with images of Diego, his touch, his kiss, the way he had looked at her as if she was the only thing keeping him tethered to this world. By morning, she was more exhausted than when she had gone to bed. But she forced herself to rise, to focus on her responsibilities. For Lucia. For her future. Yet, as she stepped into the kitchen and saw Diego sitting by the window, his piercing blue eyes meeting hers across the room, she realized something. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't escape the truth. This wasn't over. Not for either of them. Oh, that night, Sophia stayed by Lucia's side, holding her little hand while she slept soundly. She should have gone to bed. She was exhausted, drained in every possible way, but she couldn't move. Not until Diego wheeled himself into the room. I figured you'd still be here, he murmured, watching her from the doorway. She sighed, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't want to leave her alone. She's not alone, Diego said softly. She has you. Sophia looked up at him, her heart pounding in her chest. Diego, don't... He interrupted, his tone firm but gentle. Don't say we can't do this. Her breath hitched as he wheeled himself closer, his eyes burning into hers. Because I know we can. She shook her head, trying to resist. I can't risk this. Not with Lucia. I know, Diego said, his voice softer now. And I swear to you, I would never do anything to hurt her. Sophia opened her eyes, and what she saw in his face, raw, unguarded, real, shattered every last piece of her resistance. Slowly, cautiously, she leaned forward, and Diego met her halfway. Their lips met in a kiss that was nothing like the first. This wasn't desperate, it wasn't reckless, it was right. And for the first time, Sophia allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they could be something more. The morning light filtered through the hospital blinds, casting soft, golden beams across the room. Sophia woke with a start, disoriented for a moment before realizing where she was. Lucia was still asleep beside her, her small hand wrapped tightly around Sophia's fingers. Diego was seated nearby, his wheelchair positioned close enough to keep watch over both mother and daughter. His expression was unreadable, but there was a quiet intensity in his gaze that made Sophia's heart skip a beat. Did you sleep at all? She asked quietly, careful not to wake Lucia. He shook his head. Not really, but I didn't want to leave. Her throat tightened. Why? His answer was simple, yet it carried the weight of everything they had been through. Because you needed me. Sophia swallowed hard, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. For so long, she had tried to shoulder everything on her own, to be strong for Lucia, to prove she could handle life without leaning on anyone. But now, sitting here with Diego, she realized how much she had been denying herself, and how much she needed someone who understood her struggles. Over the next few days, as Lucia recovered and returned home, Sophia found herself seeing Diego in a new light. He wasn't just the man who paid her wages or the billionaire confined to a wheelchair. He was someone who cared deeply, who fought fiercely, and who refused to let his circumstances define him. One evening, after putting Lucia to bed, Sophia joined Diego in the living room. He was seated by the fireplace, staring into the flickering flames. "You've changed my life," she said softly, breaking the silence. He turned to her, surprise flickering across his features. "How?" She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Before I came here, I thought I was doing everything right, working hard, providing for Lucia, keeping us afloat. But I was drowning, Diego, and you pulled me out of that darkness. You reminded me that it's okay to lean on someone else." His jaw tightened, emotion flashing in his eyes. "You saved me too, Sophia. Before you, I was convinced I was worthless, a shadow of the man I used to be. But you made me see that I'm still capable of being strong, of being loved." Her breath caught at his words. "Do you mean that?" "Every word," he said firmly. From that day forward, their relationship shifted. It wasn't just about attraction or convenience. It was about trust, support, and a shared understanding of what it meant to fight for something worth having. Diego began attending physical therapy sessions with renewed determination, pushing himself harder than ever before. And Sophia stood by his side, cheering him on, reminding him of his strength when he doubted himself. In return, Diego became an integral part of Sophia and Lucia's lives. He helped Sophia balance her responsibilities, offering guidance and resources whenever she needed them. He even formed a bond with Lucia, teaching her how to play chess and reading bedtime stories with her. For the first time in years, Sophia felt like she wasn't carrying the weight of the world alone. One evening, as they sat together on the balcony overlooking the sprawling estate, Diego reached for Sophia's hand. "I need to ask you something," he said, his voice steady but tinged with nervousness. She turned to him, her heart racing. "What is it?" "I want us to build a future together," he said, his gaze unwavering. "Not because of obligation or convenience, but because I love you. Because I want to be a father to Lucia. Because I want to spend the rest of my life proving to you that I'm worthy of your trust." Tears welled in Sophia's eyes as she processed his words. "Are you sure? This isn't just about gratitude or guilt, is it?" He shook his head. "It's about love, about choosing each other no matter how difficult it gets." She smiled through her tears, squeezing his hand. "Then yes, let's build that future together." If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Timelenz Stories. Turn on notifications so you never miss another emotional, heartwarming tale. Because sometimes the most unexpected stories lead to the most unforgettable love. Love doesn't always start perfectly, but the best ones always find a way. It was deliberate. Diego's lips moved slowly against Sophia's, as if savoring the way she fit against him. His hand cupped her cheek, his thumb grazing her skin, igniting something deep inside her. She was the first to pull away, breathless, her forehead resting against his. "We shouldn't be doing this," she whispered, though her voice lacked conviction. Diego exhaled, his fingers still tangled in her hair. Then tell me to stop. She closed her eyes, knowing she couldn't. She didn't want to. For so long, she had convinced herself that love was a luxury she couldn't afford, that her life had no space for something so fragile, so unpredictable. But Diego was different, and no matter how hard she tried to fight it, he had become important to her, to both of them. A soft rustling from the bed made her jolt, and she quickly turned to see Lucia, stirring in her sleep, her small hands clutching the blanket. Reality came crashing back in. She pulled away from Diego, her voice shaky. "We should talk about this later." Diego studied her, his jaw tightening. He understood what she wasn't saying. Not now, not yet. But he wasn't giving up. "All right," he murmured. "Later." And despite everything, despite the uncertainty in her chest, Sophia found comfort in knowing that there would be a later. The next morning, Sophia woke up to the sound of laughter. It was light, joyful, the kind of sound she hadn't heard from Lucia in weeks. She padded toward the kitchen, only to stop in her tracks at what she saw. Lucia was sitting at the counter, her feet swinging beneath the stool, while Diego, seated in his wheelchair, was cooking. Granted, he was maneuvering carefully, but there he was, flipping pancakes with an amused expression as Lucia chatted animatedly beside him. It was the most normal scene Sophia had ever walked into, and it stole the breath from her lungs. Lucia turned, spotting her first. "Mom, Diego's making pancakes." Diego glanced at her over his shoulder, smirking. "Figured I owed you breakfast after last night." Her cheeks burned. "Diego?" He merely shrugged, his eyes twinkling with mischief. "Relax. I meant the talking part." Lucia squinted between them. "Why are you guys acting weird?" Sophia cleared her throat. "We're not." "You totally are." Diego let out a chuckle, setting a plate of pancakes in front of Lucia. "Eat, kid. Less talking, more chewing." Lucia huffed but obeyed, and Sophia took the seat across from her. She still wasn't used to this, to having Diego be part of their mornings, their routine, but she liked it more than she should. And that terrified her. Later that day, Diego pulled her aside. "We need to talk." Sophia sighed, rubbing her temples. "I know." They had been dancing around this for too long. Diego took a breath. "I meant what I said last night." She knew. She had seen it in his eyes, had felt it in his kiss. "But I need to know where you stand, Sophia," he continued. "Because if this is just something temporary for you, if you don't see a future here, tell me now." Her chest tightened. She had spent so long running from her feelings, from the possibility of something more. But looking at him now, at the man who had fought his way back from the darkness, who had opened his home and his heart to her and Luciace, knew she couldn't keep running. "I don't want this to be temporary," she admitted. "But I'm scared." Diego nodded, stepping closer. "So am I." She swallowed hard. "This isn't just about me." "Lucia." "I know," he interrupted softly. "And I want to do this right, for both of you." Sophia's breath hitched. "Diego." "I love you," he said, his voice steady. "And I know this won't be easy. I know we'll have a lot to figure out. But I want to try. I want us." Tears pricked at her eyes because she wanted that too, more than anything. She let out a shaky laugh. "You're really bad at giving me reasons to walk away, you know that?" Diego smirked. "Good. Because I don't plan on giving you any." And when she kissed him this time, there was no hesitation, no fear, just love, the kind that was worth everything. Months passed, and their lives began to intertwine in ways neither Sophia nor Diego had imagined. Diego continued his physical therapy, pushing himself harder each day, determined to reclaim pieces of the life he had lost. And Sophia stood by his side, cheering him on, reminding him of his strength when doubt crept in. Lucia, too, flourished under Diego's care. He became more than just a presence in her life. He became family. From teaching her chess to reading bedtime stories, he filled a void she hadn't even realized existed. One evening, as they sat together on the balcony overlooking the sprawling estate, Diego reached for Sophia's hand. "I've been thinking," he said, his tone serious. She raised an eyebrow. "About what?" "About us. About our future." He paused, then added, "I want to make this official. I want to adopt Lucia. I want us to be a family, in every sense of the word." Sophia's breath caught. Tears welled in her eyes as she looked at him, at the man who had given her more than she ever thought possible. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes to all of it." And as they embraced, with Lucia laughing in the background, Sophia realized something. Sometimes love doesn't come in the form you expect. Sometimes it comes wrapped in vulnerability, resilience, and second chances. And sometimes it's exactly what you need to heal. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Timelenz Stories. Turn on notifications so you never miss another emotional, heartwarming tale, because sometimes the most unexpected stories lead to the most unforgettable love. Love doesn't always start perfectly, but the best ones always find a way.